MSP Initiative. And guess what? We're back with Dave Sobel, our friend from MSP Radio and the Business of Tech podcast, as Dave likes to keep up with current events, probably more than the average IT guru, because we're head down trying to fix stuff, and Dave's actually keeping up with the world. How you doing today, Dave?
I'm good, doing my bit to try and give those insights, right? So somebody's got to be looking out for the providers. I surf through all this stuff, pull out the bits that I think are actionable and something you can look at and do something with and try and deliver it every day.
No, listen, people are obviously watching. I know I do. And that's why we bring you on to kind of recap how things are going and how the world actually is, rather than the way we think that it is. So, I'm back from that 7,000-mile tour from when we last talked, kind of driving around America with, Ken Patterson and Amy Luby and Eric Pinto and a bunch of other guys from, a couple different vendors. And, it was interesting to see how things are actually going out there. So I'm actually pretty more positive than I thought I was going to be.
Well, I mean, it was really cool to get out there, talk to people. Look, we know that we know there's good stuff going on there. What I keep saying all the time is that things are inconsistent. That's just what we have to be careful of, is that there are inconsistencies. When I talk about looking at the economy and I dig into the data, the big thing that we see is that unlike any kind of previous recessions or depressions, depending on how we want to qualify things, this one is driven differently. Like if you look at the Great Depression, you look at the Great Recession, they were problems in the banking and the capital system. The money system was flawed. What we're seeing right now is not that. There is plenty of capital. The banking systems are actually doing quite well. What we're seeing is the impact is around the service industry, i.e. anything that requires physical person-to-person contact is damaged. That portion of the economy is struggling. That's just different. And so it means we're going to see these different kind of pieces. Why lots of us have all switched to, the ability to work from home, work remotely. But there are industries that are not doing well, like that are just bottoming out.
I agree. I'm here in Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia, and this is actually one of the first state lockdowns, Dave, where the actual lockdown has been ruled unconstitutional by a federal court. And listen, nobody has to go very far to see that I'm a crazy football fan,
right?
Philadelphia Eagles fan, and I am frustrated, Dave, that we can't go see the team in the building, right? Half the teams are, the other half aren't. It's a little bit of a competitive disadvantage, if you would. And I'm saying it can be done safely. I'm not trying to go and just go crazy without any intelligent thinking about it. But all things considered, there are a lot of small businesses out there that aren't going to come back, and we know that. And then one of the things that you actually touched on recently was the whole, work from home is not the same as school from home, right?
Yeah, I've been looking at the edge. Like, again, I like to look at these issues where I say, how can we understand what's going on here with an eye to, can we help? Is there an opportunity here?
Sure.
Obviously, the channel did a really great job of helping a lot of businesses work from home, move that from home. And I think that there is a lot to say, we did a really good job there. I'll pause and go, we ought to be looking back at security. I'm worried about what we did really fast.
I agree.
But that's not what we're going to dig into right here. What we're going to look at is the fact that, look, school from home is not work from home. And I don't think that's going very well. None of the data says this is really going very well. And we can start from all of the different pieces of it. By the way, all of which I'm going to talk about, an IT solution provider should be hearing this going, oh my God, that's something we could solve. But there's not enough training. There's not enough investment in the platforms. There's not enough understanding of how to effectively deliver it and measure the business value. If you talk about teaching online is different than teaching in the classroom, right? That's just
I have a cousin who's been a teacher now for the last 6 years. He usually teaches history, but now they just plugged him into English, and he's never taught that as a professional. And he'll tell you that the whole work, school from home, they just say they have a bad connection, they disappear. There is no such attendance, right? There is,
which is where that I'm also going with this. Is like, not only do we have like connection problems, I mean, we have students that don't have connections. We have whole portions of the population that don't have broadband, that aren't able to get online. I mean, it is hugely impactful. And by the way, like, it's also, there's impact based on race. I was digging into some data which shows that actually in Black communities are roughly 10 years behind in terms of their broadband availability versus white communities.
Really?
Like, really. I mean, it's, and you look, and when I look at this as like a good capitalist, I go, you mean you're keeping markets from me? like I want to serve as many communities as possible. I want to be able to take our technology services offerings and bring them to as many places as possible.
But Dave, I mean, again, here in Philly Metro, Comcast is headquartered here. They have like a freebie low income cable internet option, right? And I believe at one point, these metros were trying to do like citywide Wi-Fi with like WiMAX technology type stuff, and then all of a sudden it disappeared, right?
Yep. So, but I'm calling out. There's a new Deutsche Bank report that shows a 10% lower level of broadband penetration for Black households over white.
Now,
and it's a problem. And you look and say, particularly now, and by the way, what was scary about it is you look at the way that it played out. Black people had to venture out of their homes 135% more than white people in April compared to the pre-COVID dates. And they were looking at geolocation data gathered in majority Black and majority white neighborhoods in Chicago, New York, and LA. So they're looking in the same cities and they're saying, we're going to look at the majority neighborhoods. And they found out that those services are just not available in the same way in those communities. So you're exactly right. Like, we think about it at like, oh, the Philadelphia level, oh, the Chicago level, like, oh, we have broadband. No, but it actually gets into further problems of it in that it's not penetrated enough in neighborhoods.
So is that more of a construction problem, Dave? Like, when you're in these major metros to dig up streets and run fiber and coax,
it's the typical multiple reasons problem. Like, it's not just construction. It's can the customer bases afford it? Are the companies incentivized to move into it? Are the banking structures the same? Is the capital the same? It is the multiple level of systemic problem. Like, it's one of those bits where you wish it was just one problem, right? You wish it was the like, oh, it's just construction, we could take it on. No, it's that gnarly problem of, wow, this is a systematic thing that we're going to have to break down. I keep coming back to, though, this idea that, I mean, I want to look at this from the perspective of, I want to open these markets up. I want to be able to serve these markets like this. You look at this and say, by the way, we're constantly talking about needing more technology enabled engineers, staff. Well, that comes from education, everybody. So if we're not diving in and making sure that everybody gets the ability to get the education, we're not able to drive to that. And so that's where I'm.
Okay, so that kind of falls into another topic that you touched on, I believe this past week, which is 5G. Is it for real, or is it a smoke screen, or what is it?
I feel like I'm old man Simpson shaking my fist at the cloud again. So look, I buy into the promise of 5G, and we've all been talking about 5G and the promise for 2 years now, 3 years, right? This idea of smart cities, these smart buildings, we're going to enable everything. We're going to put sensors on everything. I like it, right? Great opportunity. And you look at this and say, if we can start building more interesting systems, we're going to be able to do something with it. Well, looks like the data's not there. So I've looked at two different studies. The first one I looked at was the Open Signal did a report, and they looked at the average 5G speeds around the world. Right. Mm-hmm. We oftentimes talk about 5G and think like, well, what cities is it in the US?
Dave, what can we define 5G for a second? Because like, I look at my cell phone and I'm seeing 5G on the screen. I mean, right. Obviously, not all 5G is created equal. So what do you call, what is the definition of 5G?
So the definition of 5G that I'm looking at is the idea of the use of the new spectrums to deliver higher end speeds. right? That's the promise.
Like talking 1 gig speeds, 500 meg speeds.
You're measuring at speed. What I'm saying spectrum, I'm saying we're moving into those new additional areas. So the idea between the generations of 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G is that we've opened up new electromagnetic spectrum to allow the carriers to deploy in that. So 4G, that LTE stuff, that's like things in the 2.4 gigahertz range. 5G includes some stuff down in the 800 megahertz range, stuff in the higher level. What I mean by that is that. Right. So we're trying to say like this next generation of technology uses new available spectrum. And the promise of that spectrum is higher delivery of speed.
Right. Like they're talking about, I guess the marketing message of 5G is eliminating the need for landline, period.
Sure. That is the promise. And by the way, in some countries, we're seeing that. So I'm going to quote the Open Signal report. South Korean users are seeing 5.3 times faster average 5G speeds than 4G, 312.7 megabits, followed by Australia at 215, Taiwan 210, Canada at 178. By the way, Saudi Arabia's 5G is 14.3 times the speed of 4G, averaging 414.2 megabits.
Wow.
But in the US, a mere 1.8 times faster. And by the way, slow for both, 28.9 megabits for 4G and 50.9 for 5G. And here's where it got even wrinklier. The average US 5G performance was actually slower in the study in May. Like it's getting slower, not faster.
So now all right, so let's rewind for a second. So you're saying 5G, we're really, really, really behind from a global standpoint.
From a global perspective, absolutely. So you look at that instead, we take the quick step back and we go, let's talk about the promise. Yeah, looks like it's there, right? There's countries totally delivering on that promise, getting really great mobile speeds, but not here. Like not here. And we're potentially years away from being able to see that. You know, the PC Mag did some digging in terms of what they were seeing just in the US, and it's pretty consistent. Like this 5G networks in many cases are actually slower than the 4G networks based on the way that they rolled it out. Now, the carriers are going to make arguments of, well, you know, we're rolling out the first gen or second gen of the technology is going to be faster. You know, that's 2 to 3 years, out. By the way, they will talk about, and I'm noticing, Brent's got a great questions that the commercials are BS. Sure, there are some small pockets of very, very fast connectivity.
Probably like, very downtown metro pockets.
Yeah, like in about 3% of New York City, you can get, very, very high rates of speed. But they have.
So if the speeds aren't there, Dave, and they're advertising, and I believe they're even charging more for it, and they're charging you more for more expensive devices to get to it, like it's just a money grab then? This thing's not coming anytime soon. Is what you're
saying. It's not coming anytime soon. But by the way, funny you bring up the money. Americans and Canadians pay more for lower levels of service than countries like South Korea and Norway that have faster and cheaper research. If you dig into the markup, which is, again, a story I covered on the show, the markup did some research around this. We are getting less and paying more.
That doesn't sound like a good combo.
No, it really, exactly. And so you look at this and say, like, the promise of 5G, all totally true. Like, this is what's like, you look and say, like, they were promising faster networks. Oh, yeah, we're seeing it in the real world. Just if the world happens to be the United States, you're not seeing it. And again,
and probably not a good time that, with all the pandemic stuff, right? You have people who started college, right? And then they decided to go back to virtual or, the school system, right? I heard on the Wire the other day that the Los Angeles school system is the largest school system in the United States, K-12, right?
Yep,
it's like
right.
8,000 students or something like that. And they're not talking about going back to school until like after, the holidays, right? Christmas, New Year.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's just the current plan, right? We don't know exactly how long these different pieces will take. I come at this, again, I'm coming at this from the business angle. We as solution providers should be really upset by this because they are keeping us from being able to deliver on some of these new promises. Like this is if we want to provide opportunities in this, we want to deliver these kinds of solutions, we need all of the components of the channel working together, and the telco companies are part of it, and they, and we should be putting pressure on them to actually deliver on the pieces that they promise. You don't like getting political on this stuff, and I won't come out on a side. I will just observe, by the way, that these are regulated industries. Yep. Why are we could have a legitimate conversation about internet as a utility. And
as long as we're not using Huawei equipment, right, Dave?
Well, exactly. But hey, let's put a positive, George, you're right, and we can laugh about it, but let's put a positive spin. Let's incentivize an American company to do that, right? Yeah. Or or a European company, or if we're concerned about China, let's incentivize a company to solve that problem for us. Look at it the same way that we invest in roads and bridges, and we all like clean water, we like power. Like, these are things we've decided are utilities. I think there's an argument to be made for broadband as a utility. Hey, by the way, we all like the post office. It's a government regulated bit.
Dave, we're leaking into.
I know, but I wanted just people to think about it. The reason the post office works is that the government has said we need to deliver this to every American.
Yep.
Right. That's the reason it works. Private businesses may not be able to get to every rural part of the country. So we make a collective investment saying that there is a reason to deliver that service. We should have smart conversations about how to invest it and how to run it. That's the political stuff.
Let's hope one of these people that have their pre-approved questions on these debates coming up, they'll ask about it, because I agree with Miller, who just chatted in saying, hey, this 5G thing is a startup basically, and that we're going to pay a whole lot more before we actually see it happen. And, they're advertising all the new phones and all the new devices, and we're all paying more.
I'm just not willing, Alan, I get it. I get where you're coming from on this, but I'm not willing to go along with it, because I'm pointing with other countries going, well, they seem to be doing, the Canadians are getting faster speeds. There's all kinds of these other countries that are delivering on this promise. I'm under the impression that this is a great world-leading economy. I'd like us to be in the mix. I want us to be in that group. And if it was just, if we're just looking internally and saying, well, the American companies are living at the same level. Okay, yeah, but there are European versions that are doing better. There's Asian versions of this that are doing. The Aussies, who have long had struggles with bandwidth, and they're getting those high speeds. Maybe we shouldn't just put up with this.
I wish that there was that. Alan continues, like, take a different take. 5G is like 10-bit internal networking, sharing a DSL pipe. Oh, he's talking about all the links across the network.
Oh, totally. And again, this is where we should be looking at how we want to invest in this. Again, I'm looking at it from the economic perspective as solution providers. I want to sell these solutions, these high-speed connected devices kind of stuff. I want to get into those markets. I want all of us to be delivering on these additional pieces. By the way, I want to help. We talked about education. I look at this and go, these are all things that all of us as the listeners we could all get into this.
I would think 5G would absolutely help the school from home scenario without
right.
Let's zoom out, because there's other things now from the economy that's being affected.
Yep.
You wrote on two different topics that kind of are on different edges of this whole, current state of affairs. You talked about the economy around office space, and you talked about IT unemployment and insolvency data. So we're talking about different parts of the bubble now, right?
Yep. Oh, exactly. So what was it? Yeah, so it was interesting because I was digging into some data again. I always like to figure out where's the opportunity, right? Or in this case right now, where are the parts of the economy that I need to think about as potentially damaged? Particularly because if I'm putting my solution provider hat on, I expect that everybody who's an MSP, a solution provider, a tech services company, I expect you're thinking a lot about who your customers are to make sure that they're viable, that you're able to keep them going, or you understand which ones are at risk, or you're looking for those markets, right? So there was some discussion about the idea of the economy related to office space that isn't the office space directly. So, for example, if you think about those markets around office space, right? Well, Starbucks is reporting a massive drop in revenue because people aren't getting coffee on the way to the office, right? Like, they were reporting this $2.3 billion revenue decline last quarter because of the drop in foot traffic.
Wow.
Right. That's a pretty substantial one. And then if there's an article on Medium that I had cited on this that actually dug into a couple of different things. Think about the $2 trillion in corporate travel that's not going to happen this year.
Wow, that's a big number.
That's a big number. And look, we're all feeling it, right? George, you and I are guys that have come off the road, right? I know that my points balance isn't going up, but that also means that there's the ticket to go along with that. There's the hotel impact to that. There's all of the money coming out of the Ubers and the restaurants and all of the stuff that we would be spending as part of that. As of July, $21 billion of hotel-related mortgage loans were delinquent. And that's compared with $1.15 billion pre-pandemic. It's a massive, it's $20 billion in mortgage loans on these properties, on these hotels. Wow. Right. And you look at this and you say, okay, this is when I talk about those related to contact businesses, this is one of those areas, right? I wouldn't have immediately thought, the mortgages on hotels would be at risk. Okay, that's another set of data that I need to start thinking about as I interpret what's happening. I talked about the banking industry being good. Well, okay, except if you're in the business of mortgages on hotels, maybe that's not such a great bit. And so there's elements of this to look at from those elements. That's what I was thinking about when I brought that stuff up.
No, fair enough. I mean, and then on the other side, what did you find? I mean, we keep on hearing that unemployment is now down below 8%. So people are going back to work. But how does that necessarily fit from an IT standpoint? Like for whatever it's worth, before the pandemic, there was 10 job postings for every one job seeker, right? So it was very problematic.
It's problematic. Now, looking at the Bureau of Labor Statistics data that was published, that's looking at the August numbers, IT occupations were actually up for 4.6% unemployment from 4.4%. So a slight increase there. Gains in manufacturing helped, which makes some logical sense if you can build things and make things. What was also interesting to me there was I was looking at some of the data around insolvencies. They're actually projecting, there's a company that studies this and they are looking at that. And then what they're concerned about is they were projecting a 39% increase in the US in insolvencies. And what they were saying was many countries have implemented all of these fiscal stimulus measures. They're not forever. We know here in the US, they've all expired, right? And you and I, the last time we talked about how the fact that I was looking at it from the perspective of that bridged us through July.
Yep.
I was going to be interesting to see what happened beyond that. We're here now. So we're seeing, look, it's still early. These are all trailing indicators, right? But hey, there's an uptick in IT unemployment there. It went up by 0.2%. Is this crisis? I'm not saying it's crisis. I still remain incredibly wary and cautious because I feel like that's the right way to approach this.
You're trying to balance the world. I'm on the very, gung-ho side, and you're on the, whoa, let's balance that out guy. I see.
Well, exactly. Well, because I look at it and say, like, I always take the perspective of if I plan for the worst and hope for the best, I can navigate this out. I'm with you on that. I want things to be better. I just will freely admit I don't see data that's pointing me that way yet. So, for example, we dug into some recent survey data from solution providers that were expecting a recovery in Q4 of this year.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any data, guys. like me, the guy who's looking at all of these market data is not seeing evidence of a Q4 recovery. I'm whether or not it's going to get significantly worse or maintain. we'll figure that out as we go. I'm just cautioning everybody who has this like, oh, it's going to all get better in Q4. I don't see that data. I don't see what
but is it getting worse?
What I think is happening is it's not as bad as we thought it might be. Remember, we had seen some data come out of service leadership that had shown decline in some of in revenue. Let me pull up that data while we're talking about it. Paul Dipple released his mid-year service provider report card, and we hadn't, since we've last talked, that data has come out. What we're actually seeing in that front is across the top quartile of providers, revenue's down only about 4%. That's good, right? But what they actually saw was cost of goods dropped 8% and SG&A down 10%. So gross margin got better because people were doing a great job of managing it. What worries me is the bottom quartile, where revenue is down 15%, but COGS down only 7.7%, and this profitability is down 30%.
Yeah.
Right. Now look, again, bottom quartile performers. I'm not but I'm being realistic and saying, look, somewhere between there is the average performer. Right? So we're not all best in class particularly not all best in class all the time.
So Brent's asking then, based on where you see the data going, right? This prognostication now.
Oh, sure. Let's predict.
All right. So is this a Q3 2021? Or where do you see the ball ultimately rolling back to where we were pre-COVID? If we have to get there.
Two different questions. So let's address them because they are related. Look, I tend to be the glass is half, like not full, not empty, like the glass is half. So what that means is I'm looking at the data and I'm saying, look, I believe it is dependent on a vaccine. We do not have we don't have anything to measure other than that. We know that we are waiting on a vaccine. I listen to medical experts that I have no reason to believe there will be one this calendar year. So let's talk about it next. If we look at it, we want to do some planning. We assume it's in the first part of next year. We can have widespread distribution over the course of next year. Perhaps, and I think we have the ability to invest in rolling that out very quickly as a society. We're highly motivated to do it. So you could see a projection with vaccination levels through that are much better in the summer of next year. So I think, Brent, I think you're right. Are we talking about things being much better in Q3 2021? That seems better to me. The idea you asked about restore to previous levels, I think that's further out. I think that's the element of, I think that's 2022 or 2023 to get back to those 2019 levels. I think it just takes a while and to get there. I also, Brent, I freely agree with you. This idea of I'm not talking about the new normal, the next normal. It just is, right? This is the situation we're in right now. The other side will also be different. We're learning a ton. There's all kinds of new ideas. There's new ways of doing things. I don't think everything's just going to snap back. I think we're going to come up with some new version. I'm fascinated. When I look at this from a positive perspective, I think there's some real opportunities for changes to the way people are doing. I was digging in, literally, I'm thinking ahead for what the next story might be. I'm digging into some research around companies that are approaching this from a remote first perspective, that are kind of re-architecting the way they build their company to think about it like, I'm just going to build remote as my first way of doing things and emphasize asynchronous decision making. For example, the idea that we don't all have to get on a meeting to decide something. You can write an old school memo. It just happens to float around through a workflow and people review it on their schedule, and it's got a deadline and a structure, and that flows through and we review it. And that's just a different way of working, right? Or the idea of we're going to create, I don't think we're going to get rid of offices, but I think we're going to think about them differently. They are collaboration spaces and we use them in different ways. And do you have to be there from 9 to 5? No, you got to be there to interact on things that require human interaction. And other times are the idea of working remotely. So I think these ideas are becoming more mainstream. I always laugh and go, when my father, who'd never done a video call in his life, finally likes FaceTime, I'm seeing some changes in the way people are thinking.
Fair. Which, to that point, earlier in the month, you had mentioned that Microsoft had adjusted some things on their side that seemed small, but actually may help a lot of the guys who maybe don't even have solutions in place for some of these things.
Yeah, I continue to, I'm kind of high on Microsoft these days. I after a long time of them not getting it, I think they've got their mojo back, right? So what was interesting to me, this is a really small change that they made in Microsoft 365 in the admin center. And what they're doing now is that when you set up an organization, Windows Defender antivirus will be activated, as well as web filtering and protecting files with the BitLocker drive encryption. And notably, for the security settings to be applicable, the end user PC needs to be enrolled in Intune.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I just look at that and I go, okay, that they're getting into it, right? Like when I describe antivirus, web filtering, protecting files with drive encryption, that's a core piece of managed services, right? Like that they are now making just available when you enroll an organization in Microsoft 365. Now,
they're definitely tilting people to the stack. There's no question about it.
Now I get it. Who's worrying? I mean, if anybody's sitting here worrying about their margin on antivirus, I think they kind of have missed the point a little bit, right? Like they're poking at these commoditized portions of the stack. So I'm sitting here going like, look, people, I'm not stressing this from the perspective of, oh my God, they're moving into your space. What I'm just saying is the bar is going up, right? They're just consuming those pieces into it. And again, remember their larger strategy. They are talking about more pieces that include things like patch management. They've also announced just recently that there is an option for Azure managed VMs to automatically have the critical security patches applied automatically. They'll take that work over for you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a piece of it. And back to another story we've talked about before, they're hiring an engineer to build a product called Cloud PC, which is a fully managed, Windows desktop offering that would be offered by Microsoft. Again, they're nibbling at these core bits that I see as very much commoditized. Like patch management is unglamorous. It is not something that it's just something that we bake in. But I get the value of just giving that to Microsoft, right? The same reason why we just gave them our Exchange servers, because after a while at scale, it just makes sense for them to do it with Microsoft 365, and we will deliver the higher value services on top of that. So what I'm just pointing to is they look, everybody, your managed services, Microsoft is aiming for pieces of it. I think this is natural. I'm not setting this up as an alarm. I'm just saying you've got to factor this into your planning because that's the way this is going. Part of it for me, I look and say, like, if I was a new provider, and I've done pieces on this, like you could build a new provider right now that just does the business consulting and really just hands off a lot of this other stuff.
I agree.
So if you're a legacy provider, you got to be aware of that core piece is something you've got to be examining, because you can't just hold on to that revenue thinking it's always going to be there. Is it going to go away next month? No, it's not going away next month. But you can see this coming. So plan for it. Start thinking about what you're going to do if you want to move that to Microsoft, when you want to move it to Microsoft, if you're going to do something else, or build your business saying, I'm just going to assume I'm not making money there.
Yeah,
that's okay. It's just something that I'm doing to make sure that it's not my true value add.
So does that go into the topic of what are better performing companies doing?
It's so what was interesting here is what are the better companies are doing is starting to think more about these higher value services. And we're seeing it in kind of the results that are happening of that. One of the bits that, the business in the top tier who are better performing on the shift to work from home are actually the ones that have invested in training and making sure that they work from home technologies are understood. In fact, businesses in the top tier are 33% more likely to train staff on work from home technologies when compared to the bottom tier companies.
Wow.
So, us putting our opportunity hats on here, if we want to help our customers, oh, and by the way, our own staff, and we want to outperform, if we are selling and offering training around using these technologies, our customers will outperform. Oh, and by the way, it's an opportunity for us, and we can link it with data. You can go to your customer and say, one of the things that we're seeing, and the best companies that are outperforming are the ones that train their staff on this. And by the way, you do not have to worry about Microsoft moving into this space, because this is a wonderfully high touch, high value engagement where you're doing real business value stuff. It's people skills stuff. You've got to, it's not just engineers. It's about making sure that you can actually do teaching and build them online, but there's partnerships if you need to get there.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I know we all talk about training, but I don't think anyone has figured out how to, there's services out there that have the prefab videos and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, I just think that it's pretty much a missing gap, right? From the service provider menu for sure.
Exactly. And profitable. This is great work. This is great work to deliver. When we all talk about this idea of like high value services, I like it when I can point to like, well, there's one. That's a specific example of something you can take to your customers and know you're going to make good money and they're going to do better with.
Yeah. So Brent brings up, the internal training point. So he brings up business certifications around CMMC, right? So for anyone that doesn't know, that's the government cybersecurity, de facto standard. And then obviously training and staff around, backups and log management, testing, stuff like that, because obviously new laws are kicking in that, may be specific to, data breach and stuff like that, right?
Yep,
so
right.
Of course, then he brings up the employee cost is the number one expense for most businesses. Sure.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
And I always say this, and I will remind everybody all the time, the amount of time that IT solution providers spend worrying about their tools, like the tools they use to deliver their solution versus the amount of time on their staff is sometimes staggering. An average tool cost, like all your tools, right? All of the bits, like you guys have a tool, the RML, all of that stuff. It's like 5 to 7% of your total cost. Your staff is like 60 to 70% of your total cost. But everybody spends so much more time worrying about, do I have the right RMM? Do I have the right PSA? Why do you spend your time on your people? like that's what you're actually, if you spend all that energy that you're worrying about whether or not you're on the right RMM or not, and you go spend that on training your people, you will outperform. I'm sure of that because all the data tells me that, because that's your actual biggest cost. You manage that cost really effectively, all the other things will fall into place.
I feel like there's, but there's just so many different vendors, there's so many different certifications, and like what's important, right? Obviously you said work from home and all the technology around that, but I mean, it can get, it can stack on you very quickly, right?
Well, right. But I actually say, like, this is where, like, again, most IT people that are in this business have some kind of expertise already. They're technical people. You know this. You come from that background. I am not worried about your ability to solve that problem, right? And Brent's totally right. The worst tool properly used will outperform the best tool poorly used. Like, it's totally true. And by the way, they're all pretty good. They're all pretty good tools. like most of the stuff in the market that has some maturity to it, it's a pretty good tool. Don't worry about that so much. Spend your time on your people, on your education, on driving into higher business value stuff, and you will outperform.
Oh, so back to other opportunities, right? You say zero trust offers opportunity. I assume that's the security conversation.
Yeah, it totally is. And look, this is one of those areas where I never position myself as a security expert, right? I want to make sure that I'm clear on that. There are plenty of people that you should go to and listen to if you need security expertise. But what I'm looking at is when I look at it from a business perspective, and I try and put on like a CIO hat and look at the bigger companies and what trends are they doing and how can we then adapt that into a managed services. By the way, we're always talking about being virtual CIOs, right? Well, so let's go learn from the CIOs. The ones that are looking at this have been taking this idea of going to and adopting a zero trust mentality. And what's interesting is that a Deloitte survey of a bunch of different companies have shown that 37% of them are actually increasing their adoption of zero trust. And the idea behind zero trust is about the idea of protecting assets from any endpoint. But the biggest issue to it is the learning curve, that it's a big, steep learning curve. And it's fused with controls and the modern tech you need to do it, but that's hard. And I immediately go, well, that's what service providers are good at, is taking these hard organizational, structural, procedural things and converting them into deliverables, right? That's the whole idea of managed services, the whole idea of proactive, so all of these pieces. And so I've been looking a lot into this idea of the concept of least privilege in a modern way. There's tons of research around this. NIST has guidance on there. There's a lot of area, but I keep looking and saying, this is services led, not product led. So I love it. Like I immediately go, this falls exactly into what I'm looking for solution providers. So this idea of using zero trust as a conceptual framework to deliver risk management, i.e. security. Yeah, this is screaming opportunity to me. And because all the challenges are around the things providers are good at, I keep looking and saying, yep, I want to focus more of my attention here.
Interesting. No, I mean, there's obviously a ton of solutions on the market for this. And obviously this all started off with security first, right? I'm not saying become a full-blown SOC or, something like that.
Whatever's appropriate for you. I will always say, look, everybody now is in some basic level of risk management around technology for their customers. That's security. You can't not do it. What you do versus what you don't do, that's your strategy. That's the way you're going to engage in there. Zero is not an option. And I keep looking at this saying zero trust feels like a really great framework to start working towards. It's good guidance to get you there. And that's where I'd be spending my time.
Fair enough. So circling back around, we're right down the train tracks. How to grow your customer base by 10% and achieve above the industry median performance.
So this is really where that I've been looking. I'm going to link this back. We'll start with how to grow your the customer base 10%. Let me observe here that the reason that I'm looking, when I brought up the digital divide on Black households versus white households, is this idea of that's 10% of the market. So meaning if we can work with telcos and make sure that we're pressuring this, we can grow the market by that 10%. Because we got a whole big growth to go there. So I tie this in.
You're basically, there's a hidden customer base and workforce in the places that aren't connected. Is what
exactly. And this brings me to, and we'll take this. We're going to talk some diversity here, and I don't want everyone look. I'm coming at this from a business perspective.
Everybody, buckle your seatbelt. This is going to be a good one.
We need to start having some uncomfortable conversations to make a difference on this, and that's where my head's at on this. So I'm going to try and be thoughtful. When you start looking at how to achieve above industry median performance among the Fortune 500 companies, 9% of board members are Black men or women per the board list. And among the S&P 500, 37% lack any Black directors. But that said, diversity boards are 43% more likely than non-diverse boards to achieve financial performance above the national industry median for companies in the top quartile versus the bottom quartile.
That's interesting stat.
It's very interesting. And so what I'm looking at this saying is this idea of thinking about diversity, not just because I think it's the right thing to do. Treating people, giving everyone the same opportunities, that's the right thing to do, but it's actually proving to be really good business. that by embracing this, there's a lot of stats that are showing that actually makes a big difference. So, for example, I can show that you can outperform financially from that perspective. Board, if you're a diverse board, you are likely to outperform ones that don't. Well, that seems like a good reason to start looking at that. We talk a lot about diversity in hiring, right? And addressing your hiring and making sure that you look at it. CompTIA's got some new data studying around this. So CompTIA put out their diversity study recently, and they actually dug into the fact that Pew Research showed the problem around STEM workers. And there's this idea that we always talk about, that there is not enough of a pipeline, right? There just aren't enough of these people, that we don't have enough minority and women job candidates. Well, in digging into African American and Hispanic respondents to their survey, the majority told Pew that they actually were in the pipeline. They're seeking high-tech industry jobs, but they're not selected for the job based on their interview, or they were hired and had to leave the employment due to diversity issues in the workplace. So we're always talking about, oh, there aren't enough of these people. Well, actually, the data is telling us that they are there. Our hiring practices are not catching, like bringing them in, because there's systematic problems. Again, I'm not pointing to people and saying their individual hiring manager may, but the system is not getting the right people to them, or pulling them into the system, or we're not keeping them because of diversity problems in the workplace. We don't want to lose people because of like that. That's a horrible reason to lose people, not just from the human perspective, but by the way, we just talked about how expensive people are. I don't want to lose them for that reason. Like, I want to.
Well, Brent brings up, you said because of diversity reasons. Do you have examples of what was missing?
Yeah. So, and in particular, let me address some of this stuff, because it comes from, like, if you think about from women on hiring, oftentimes the way job descriptions are written actually favor men over women in terms of recruiting, if it talks about just technical skills. But if you actually rewrite some of them to talk about the benefits or the overall experience of working there, there's data to show that you will actually get more applications, and the systems will not filter them out. Again, I am not a diversity inclusion expert here, but I will point people saying that there is research and ways of approaching this in the way you write job descriptions, in the way you conduct interviews, in the way that they're done, and investing in those kinds of training and making sure your people are working on it can actually bring you a wider level of candidates in the hiring practice. And then ensuring that you have those pieces in place. If you look at some of the research stuff that's been discussed around, the Washington Post had some great pieces around the efforts on diversity are actually being pushed back to the people that need it improved versus being approached from a leadership perspective. And that's some of the failure of it. It has to start at the top. And I'll bring it up here because I know we were going to talk about it. I mean, I did some research myself on looking at the IT channel. And I said, one of the things that I couldn't figure out was I couldn't find any data on leadership in the IT channel from a diversity perspective. So I did my own. So just yesterday, I released a YouTube video that includes the findings of a survey of 100 channel companies. And I will say, I'm not releasing the names, but these are a selection across the group of names that everybody knows. And I surveyed across that 876 leaders. And the methodology was I went to their websites. And I went to their leadership page and I started looking at the people they put forward based on their pictures and their description, right? And so you using pronouns, using to determine gender, using pictures to determine race. I will observe these are the leadership teams those companies chose to put forward. And I found that 82.31% of the leadership is white. Only 19.29% is female, and only 1.83% is black. And I will say, like, from a very starting position, these are the people that these companies have chosen to put forth as their leadership team. This is a self-selecting exercise. Now, I'm starting from the reason I'm not releasing like a name, like the company names and such like that, is because I really don't. This is not about clickbait. Like, I'm not trying to get people to come to my website and see if their company's on it. That's not the point. This is also not about shame. because of what I'm saying is I bet I could go find another 100 that look very much the same, because when you get to a certain size, that's just the way this all works out. What I'm saying to the IT channel is we need to take a good hard look at ourselves. Like, you need to go look at your leadership page, who you're putting forward. In some cases, I'm looking at companies that have thousands of employees that have put 4 faces forward as their leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Really? Just 4? Just 4 people are the key leaders? My easiest statement is like, look, first, take a look at your website. And my second statement is maybe you have more leaders than that. And maybe empowering them by making the table bigger is important. If I think about a boardroom and I think about a leadership team, it's possible to add seats. Leadership is not like pie, right? Like, we don't slice it up, and when we run out of slices, then we're out of pie. Like, you can actually empower more people and create larger leadership teams. I'm also going to encourage people, like, this is a larger thing to think about. But the reason I thought it was important to include some of the data around women here is we've all been having conversations around women in the channel for a decade now.
Yes.
A decade. We're at 19.29% female leadership across these companies. When I look at all non-white, it's only 16.32%. So we're only doing 3% better on the female side than we are doing on the racial side. And by the way, women are 50.8% of the population.
Yes.
It's an easier problem. We've been at it for 10 years, and we've just made a nothing dent. If we do the same thing around this problem, we're going to get the same results, which is nothing.
Yeah.
And so I'm saying, like, we are an industry of big, bold thinkers, right? Like, we like to be innovative. We like to be different. We like to solve problems. I'm saying, let's be bigger. Let's be bolder. And by the way, all the data says you outperform when you do.
Brent says that outperforms because there's more forward-thinking people in that mix.
Exactly. And you're like your communities too. If you look like your customer base, it's easier to relate to that. I mean, a simple thing, right? If a group of all men create a product, they may not have thought of all the things that will impact women. Like, you need to have the experiences of your customers in order to be able to service them. As I've observed, as we've talked about here, George, is like, there's communities you can move into that you may not be serving because of these divides. I want to open these markets up. I want us to serve them. That's how we grow the pie, right? Grow the economic pie, and it's good for everybody. I just keep looking at this saying, like, there is money to be made here, and it's the right thing to do.
Agreed. So there was one more question in from Brent, who says, when it comes to diversity, are the handicapped more at issue than the gender and racial differences?
Wow, Brent, that's a really great question, and I'm going to scribble down because I didn't ask it. I didn't ask that. This is one of those areas where you can appreciate, like, there's not a lot of data. Like, I had, like, from the reason you've heard this whole time, I'm data guy, right? Constantly spewing this report, that report. Yeah, but when I went to go look for this data, it wasn't there. I had to go create it myself. So I think it's a fair question. I'm hoping that this is an iterative process where I'm working on this over time. We as an industry start looking at this. Look, we always say all the time, you can only manage what you measure, right? We measure everything in the IT business. This is just a measurement. This is a measurement to start the conversation. I don't expect we're going to snap our fingers and fix it, but I do think we're going to start working on it.
For sure, which is interesting, and maybe it's worth bringing up that. So we talked about a bunch of different things, and you had talked about, compliance stuff in the past and these legal things that are coming down, and then we talked about, CompTIA you brought up because of their diversity kind of, results of reporting and surveys. You actually had a one-on-one conversation with the CEO of CompTIA.
I did. It's a 30-minute interview. I really do encourage people to take a listen to it. It's available both on YouTube and on the podcast. We talked about why they're making changes to their lobbying efforts, the fact that they are focused on those managed services providers, the IT providers, the IT channel, and they just were looking and saying we were not able to do a good job of serving them from a lobbying perspective, and so they made some changes. He explains that entire process, and the opportunity. They look and said, they are really good at workforce issues. Training is one of their areas, and so they were going to take their lobbying efforts and put more into addressing diversity in the workforce. Was their next step.
If that's the case, and if that's where they've moved their spotlight to, there's still that really big, hairy black hole when it comes to, government agencies and state bodies and lawmakers creating rules around our industry that they don't know.
Yep. I will point to, there's the Facebook group that Amy Babinchak started with Carl Polachuk, and I'm an administrator in there too, that we're starting that conversation, the MSP regulation and legislation group. I think that's one of the areas where there's going to be conversations about that. I really would encourage anybody listening to join the group and start listening in on that conversations, because you're exactly right. That's a hole that we need to identify how we're going to address it as service providers. Who will lead us? We're going to need somebody to step in, but it has to come from the service providers. I mean, George, and I'll say this, you're a vendor. This isn't your problem to solve. You've got your own regulation issues, particularly you're in a regulated industry, you're in telecommunications, you have your own angles. This is a service provider problem to solve. Mm-hmm. Service providers have got to step up and do it. And for anybody who sits there and thinks, I just don't want regulation. Yeah, the worst thing that's going to happen is if you leave it alone and they write a bad law. like that's
already bad laws,
right? You could be the best delivering provider and have checked all the check boxes on the list, and if they write a bad law that you then have to go handle, that's just wasted time. So you need to get involved in this to make sure either you're pushing for no regulation, or you're making sure that it is regulation that makes sense. I happen to think the regulation is coming no matter what you do, but either way, you got to get involved.
And then lastly, you had brought on, I believe, a cybersecurity insurance guru.
Well, yeah, we had a whole conversation around why insurance rates are going up. Joseph Brunsman, he has a master's in cybersecurity and is an insurance broker. We did a whole interview and we talked about we talked about regulation, we talked about the parallels to the insurance industry as well as the parallels to CPAs and doctors, the formation of state societies, how that all works, and we dug into why those rates are going up, like why everybody's rates are going up. So it's a good way for people to explore a little bit and understand what's happening in the market.
Wow, that one I'm sure is a balloon just waiting to get really big really fast.
I totally think so. I mean, and again, this is where we have to get involved or it will happen to us.
Agreed. So Dave, that was a pretty, I even skipped a couple of things, but that was a pretty comprehensive update on the going and comings of the industry. And of course, every day is a new realm. Well, one thought on the way out the door, I mean, Microsoft lost out on the TikTok bid, and it looks like Oracle stepped in, and they're now the man.
You have teased what's coming out on tonight's episode. So again, we have not even covered everybody. I'll take the moment and remind everyone you can catch all of these stories with more detailed analysis every day on the Business of Tech podcast. It's on all of the podcatchers. On today's show, I actually dig into the Gartner report that came out, their Magic Quadrant, the cloud providers, what that means. And I dive in a little bit on that Oracle TikTok thing. I think it's garbage. I think they are I think Oracle is just making a play for marketing. They're just essentially a technology partner, and all of the U.S. government's demands are not getting met by any of these pieces. We'll see if this is cronyism at work.
Well, I'm sure our president has no problem pressing the red button. So we'll see how it all comes down.
Yes, we will.
All good. Well, everyone, I appreciate you coming on. We usually have Dave every 4 or 5 weeks kind of catch us up on the ebb and flow of the space. I'm sure we'll continue to have him on. Make sure to catch him online, and then obviously make sure to keep in line on our Tuesday and Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern MSP Initiative sessions. We will keep you up to date, and thanks for continuing to watch. Dave, appreciate you jumping on, and catch up with you soon.
Sounds good.